everybody, and welcome back to the listener-supported Wednesdays with Watson podcast. I am so excited about today's episode because today meets my mission, right? You guys know how important counseling is on the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. You've heard my story. You know that it is an integral part of our healing. We have been in a month-long series on racial trauma. To this point, it is June the 15th of 2022. Those episodes are still some of the least listened to episodes, which makes me double down if I'm being honest with you. And so I appreciate you guys being here. I know that you could be anywhere, but today I'm excited that Dr. Katherine Jackson has agreed to come on to the podcast. I'm going to introduce her here in just a second, but it was really, really important to me, if we were going to do a series on racial trauma, to have a therapist on that lives in the community that we were talking about. And so this series in the Wednesdays with Watson podcast in the whole month of June has been on racial trauma. And so today I welcome Dr. Katherine Jackson to the microphone. Now, she is going to do something really cool for us at the end, and throughout the episode, she'll be telling us a little bit more about herself. She is just as passionate as I am about this, guys, and she is going to bring something to us today. I do want to say, though, that like every other therapist that we have on this podcast, Dr. Jackson is here for educational purposes only. This is not equal therapy. This may make you, and I do hope that it does spur you to therapy, but this does not equal therapy, and her presence here today is merely as a favor to me on so many levels as we are working on this series on racial trauma, where a person that does not live in the Black and brown community is trying my best to educate people on trauma in that community that is not in other communities. And all month we've been talking about how that has happened in childhood, because that's what we've been focusing on. And so with all of that being said, Dr. Jackson, I would love to welcome you to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is going to be a deep conversation. This is a big topic, but I'm hoping that we can keep it where people can digest it and not feel like they're being triggered or traumatized.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I've crafted the questions in such a way that, my hope is that we can do just that. And that certainly most of my listeners do have some form of trauma, or my podcast has been recommended to someone. And so I appreciate that. I do believe that your presence here today is going to educate those of us that don't live in the Black and brown community, and those of us who care enough to listen, just listen. And so with that being said, however, as cool and as amazing as you are, you do not get out of season 3's question, which is so funny because I say on every episode, people, you might be the only one that didn't send back to me like, okay, of all the questions you sent me, this first one that you asked me, this icebreaker question, is the hardest question of them all. And so season 3's question, Dr. Jackson, is, what is your favorite thing about how God made you?
So I can't limit it to one, so I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to cheat. I'm just going to let everybody know I'm cheating. One of my most favorite things is just the way He made me in general, and I have such a thirst and a love for God. Like, I strive to stay in close relationship with God. But also, this is why I'm cheating. One of the favorite things about how He made me is that I am Black and I am woman. And even though oftentimes those are not very big deals within the society, I'm honored to be in that role. Like, we're expected oftentimes to be superhuman, but then we're treated as subhuman as Black women. But if I got a choice, like if we get to come back here again, I would check this box again, even with all that it comes with. So
all that you have to
eat a little,
yeah,
and say 3 different things.
No, I love it. I love it. And those are 3 amazing things. And as image bearers, and the fact that you're just using what is difficult to exist in this world, A, as a woman, we both know that, but B, you're second only to Black males as being marginalized in this country, at least in the United States of America. This podcast is listened to all over the world. And so I love that. I love that you would pick it again, because that means that you're my people. Like, you're on this podcast with someone who is white, who, for the most part, am learning. You're my professor, and these people who have come on to this series before have been our professors, which is, I don't know any other way to learn, but I don't think it's fair. I will tell you that. And so now here's another thing that I would love to ask you before we jump into it, and you kind of a little bit just answered it. You are the caboose on this series, so we're going to talk about some of those episodes. But
Always at the rear.
yeah, you're at the rear. That's right. You're bringing us home, Dr. Jackson. You're bringing us home. But before we do that, I also had another question because, if I were younger, I probably would go back to school to be a therapist. Although my heart is so soft, I'm not sure that I could do that. But what inspired you to be a therapist?
So you're going to laugh just a little bit. I decided to become a mental health professional. At the time, I didn't know where and within the mental health field where I would work, but I thought it was, I saw not so good treatment of people in high school by the school personnel and the mental health people who were in the school. And so like so many kids, I thought I can do a better job than the adults. And so that became my life's mission, my passion, and it's part of just my life's ministry is doing this work. So I initially thought that I would go into psychiatry, but then I later realized that medication was not the way for me to treat people. And I am not putting down or saying don't take medication, because psychiatrists are an integral part of some people's overall wellness plan, and medication is a part of that for some people. And I know great psychiatrists when I need to refer out for people. But for me, I just knew that I would do this in a talk therapy way. And then the more I got into the mental health field, working with people of color, the textbook therapy doesn't always work for us. So I integrate brain-based practices and more integrative and holistic wellness practices into what I do with people as well. So it's gotten really fine-tuned over the years.
And I'm going to put your website in the show notes. The holistic approach fascinated me. I found myself, as I was preparing for the interview, learning about you. And thank you for mentioning that, because it can be a both and, a either or. We're all so different. I have complex PTSD, which we both know is still not in the DSM-5 diagnostic manual, which is so frustrating. And I have spent many years on and off of different medications depending on what is going on. Certainly have taken holistic approaches. I am in counseling and therapy and all of that. And so I was absolutely fascinated, and probably will be talking a lot offline with you about some of that holistic modalities. So, and I want listeners to do the same. And so we're absolutely going to send them to you, but we're going to dive in. And like you said, we're going to dive in deep. So what we're going to do is the very first episode in this series was with Tiffany Countryman and Malikia Courtney, both of them African Americans. And what I want to share with you is what they said, and then kind of ask you a question. So on the first episode, I had both of them together because we're a tribe. We connected on Clubhouse during the pandemic, and we held rooms together, and we did all kind of things. And in fact, this series was born out of a room that we had together where it became abundantly clear to me that I didn't understand the trauma of the Black and brown communities. And so these two were amazing. And so the first one was Malikia Courtney, and she told the story of, she said, I want to pick something really basic for your listeners to understand. And so for her, she shared with me what she called hair trauma. And she shared with us, a story of, just the process of what, her mom, put her through, and the perms and hair burns and blisters and all the things. But the real trauma was her parents had moved her into a white suburb, and she was in a school where she was in the minority, and she literally got beat up, and they pulled her, what she called her weave out, which absolutely broke my heart. And again, you're here for educational purposes only. I want to make sure everybody understands that. But can you speak to her experience as being attacked by that, and how that would affect a child? And you're shaking your head when I mention hair trauma, so I think that you probably could relate. And so feel free to share anything that would help my listeners understand why that's a significant trauma for Malikia.
It's a big thing, because both our hair, and for men and women, so for males and females within, I'm going to speak more specifically to the Black community, more so than other BIPOC communities. But our hair and our skin are very important to our overall identity. And it doesn't matter if you are a child or if you are an adult, is an important thing to us. And we grow up, most of us grow up with that. But when she was talking about like the perms and the straightening of the hair and all of that, for some kids that can be traumatic in and of itself, because we're going against the natural like texture. Like I got natural textures, and these aren't braids, they're twists right now. And so, but kind of going against that so that we mesh in with the general society. And some people don't want to do that. And so what's been nice in more recent years is seeing more appreciation, like us having more appreciation for, like you'll see more women wearing their natural hair, and so on and so forth. So in the US, hairstyles have been so very stigmatized. Like kids will be sent home for certain hairstyles. Some boys will have their hair like in locks, and on, and be passed over for certain things in sports or in work-wise. And some companies will say you can't even wear your hair a particular way to work at a company. And then it goes to this whole thing with what's presentable, what is professional, and by whose standards, by whose standards, because if I go to Africa, right, they're not wearing their hair like yours.
Right.
They're wearing their hair in something even greater than what I got going on here today. And that is professional for them. Wearing African cloths and prints, that is professional there. And so by whose standards? And it's not fair to people of color when we try to push everybody into that same standard. What we need is more people to have more appreciation for all of the differences. Like I love seeing the ladies, and I might be saying the name of the thing, like the Indian ladies or Muslim ladies, they wear the hijab. I might be saying that wrong though, and so please forgive me.
I think that is how you say it.
I love seeing that, but then some people look at that and then it's stigmatized. Yep. It comes with a whole bunch of other negative connotations. So when you think about being a child and you're being attacked, period, just being attacked, period, is bad.
Is an ACE. That's an adverse childhood experience. Yeah.
But then when you think about that, you're being attacked for what you look like and something that makes you unique, that definitely brings about a lot of trauma. And because at that point, that's when we're at key ages where the brain is still developing. We're still developing identity. We're still trying to understand the world as a whole. And then it can just turn into some, at its worst, it can turn into self-hate, but then it makes you feel like you're not worthy, you're not good enough. And then if it really eats away at you from at the core, it starts to turn into self-hate, because then you don't feel pretty enough. You don't feel like you're good enough. You don't feel like, you fit into this world, when really it is the world that is not accommodating and accepting of you.
And that is why we're doing this. If one person listens to these episodes and makes a change and understands, when she told me that, it was not on video, my jaw dropped. Like, wow. I never in a million years would have thought about it. And it just made my brain go in so many different directions. And it made me know that we were doing the right thing by doing this series. And because, and to your point, first of all, you're born with what you're born with, right? So I'm born with blonde, semi-wavy, pain in the butt hair that I have to straighten because it's got enough wave to be, it's kind of in between. I'm born with what I'm born with. And so Malikia went home that day thinking I was born broken. This is how I was born. Hair's not something that you can alter it and you can change it and you can do, but this is who I am. This is how God made me. I came to this world with these follicles of hair that are going to come all throughout my life. And so hair is something that you can't change.
Before we go on, and guess and the questions with that. So like you said, we're born with certain hair. Well, we can straighten it. We can do different things to it and try to mesh into society. I don't think we should have to. Right. I love the differences that we all come with. But the same is true with skin. It just made me think of it as you were talking. So some people, and I remember this from a class I took, you can go in and you can be Jewish and nobody knows. You can go in and you can be a part of the LGBT community and nobody knows. But when you're Black and sometimes even brown, depending on the hue, we can't take it off. We can't straighten it out. We can't, change it and then change it back when we're amongst our people or anything. We're Black all the time. So
That's so
another.
powerful. That's such a powerful
Yeah.
point, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So these things that are stigmatized in BIPOC communities, there are so many things that you can fix, and I'm air quoting when I say that because
Yeah, because it really should be fixed,
no,
right?
heck no, you shouldn't have to. You should be able to do whatever you want to do. I do. I wear my hair whatever way I want. Normally, I put it's up in a ponytail 99% of the time. And so, but that is a powerful, powerful point, is that people in the Black, Indigenous, people of color communities are who you are. I am incredibly, there is no pigment in my skin. There is not a SPF sunscreen high enough for me. I can't do anything about that. You know what I'm saying? And so I just can't do anything about it. I can't do anything about it. And so to judge me based on how God put me on this planet is asinine to me. I will never understand it. And you and I could talk for hours about that.
Just on that one
On
point,
that
but
one
we
thing.
want to touch some
But
other
it's
stuff.
so powerful, and I want that to breathe for a second for my listeners. Think about this for a second. There is something that you were born with that a good portion of the world has a preconceived notion about that you cannot change. Think about living that life. I'm going to let that breathe just for a second. Think about living that life. The second person on that interview, Tiffany Countryman, who is an absolute hoot trip. She is amazing. She's Tiff the homie Countryman, and she does a bunch of things. She's a playwright, which is why what she said to me was really interesting. She said she felt like, and she weighed in a little bit on the hair trauma, but she answered something very differently. She said, my whole life, I was taught to act a certain way, to say certain things, and so are we. Look, I'm from the South. I still say yes, ma'am to people younger and older than me, and people don't say yes, ma'am to me anymore because I'm older than they are now. That switch has been flipped a little bit, but some of what she was talking about is basic manners. But she said in her home, she said, and I quote, and I'm looking down because I want to get it right. Black people have to act a certain way to not get judged or killed. And she said, for me, it was the loss of the ability to be who I am and to be creative was stifled. And I'm still trying to unstifle that today. I was wondering if you can speak to that at all.
So I grew up in a home where being a part of I grew up in a Black community, first of all, and being a part of the Black community was very important. My parents still strong Black connection, and we've trickled that down to the younger generations in the family too. So I feel really blessed to have had that. But I've had some experiences that were similar to what she's saying, as an adult. So I didn't have, maybe because I did grow up in a Black community, I went to Black schools. I didn't start going to school with people of other races until I went to college. So got my BA. And then beyond, the more I went up and became Dr. Jackson, the less of me I saw in different spaces. And especially being a Black woman who specializes in neuro, I'm often the only one at a lot of those conferences. So, but my upbringing and the core of being Black and having that, a strong identity and connection to it is what helps me to buffer it. Because when I was doing my therapy practicum for my doctorate, one of my colleagues said something about, we were talking about hair. You just think two ladies talking about hair. She was a white colleague. And then I told her, I was like, yeah, and I told her something about the hair hygiene with Black women and on. And she was like, oh yeah, because your hair is dirty then. And it was just so I felt like your face looked. And then stigma, and like that, it was like some stigma. It didn't stick to me because of the strong way that I was brought up. But I was just like, and it was just her ignorance and knowing what the difference in our hair. We cannot. You guys can wash your hair every day if you want, even though, like, I've watched episodes of Dr. Oz and he suggests
Don't.
not to do that too, right? And and so, but it was just like, and then with the whole thing of having to do things a certain way, I remember being pulled over after working a 13-hour back to back to back. I do not recommend this to anybody. I don't do this anymore as a psychologist myself, but I had 13 hours of back to back patients with very little like break, like the little break that you get just like to write your notes in between. And so I was extremely tired and I stayed after to write notes, and I left just before. So I guess I was there longer than 13 hours, but I left just before the alarm would come on at the office. I forgot to turn my lights on. And the police pulled me over. And this was during the time with Trayvon Martin and all the other major killings that were happening by police to Black people. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I was on the phone with a family member. So I put the phone down. I just said, be quiet, just in case, and on and on and on. And then I didn't know why they had pulled me over. They said it was because of the lights and on. But I was so afraid. And I don't think I had that much of a threat, but I remember saying, and I didn't know this was something I shouldn't have even had to have said until I spoke to some other people at a place where I volunteered. And they said, you never should have had to say that. But I said something like, because they were like, where are you coming from? And on and on. And I was like, oh, I'm Dr. Jackson. I'm coming from such and such a place. And he was like, oh, from the hospital. I don't work at the hospital. I worked at a place that was very close to the hospital. I just said yes. And on and on. And then I was like, but we come up with whatever is going to save our life so we can get home. That's it. And I said, if he thinks I'm a doctor, maybe he won't do anything. And it was like a darker area, and I should have drove to a lit area as well. But we say what we need to so that we can get back home to our family. So, and I didn't know I should never had to drop the doctor thing to be safe and on and on. So nothing happened. Thank God. I don't know if it was the doctor thing that helped. Everybody just say you're a doctor out there.
Yeah, seriously. I want to say to you, I'm so sorry. I mean, like, my heart literally is just breaking. Because as a survivor of childhood abuse and domestic violence, my whole life was about performing so that I could not be identified by the things that had happened to me. For a lot of years, when somebody asked me who I was, because we're weaving identity a lot into this conversation. For a lot of years, when people asked me who I was, I would say, my name is Amy Watson. I'm a CEO. I have a master's degree. I'm a this. I'm a this. I'm a this. And then one day, I was at a speaking engagement. It flipped for me. The pastor said, Amy, tell the people who you are. And this is how I knew that the Lord had done some healing in my heart. And I didn't say I'm all these things, letters behind my names or things that I had accomplished because I've spent a whole life performing. I said, my name is Amy Watson, and I am a precious daughter of the Most High God. And I hope that if you ever get pulled over again, when that cop says whatever, I am Catherine, and I am the precious daughter of the Most High God. Anymore. Yeah, don't get pulled over again. I got pulled over the other day, and he was really nice to me, but I was just like, I'm gonna get this ticket, but he let me go.
No, I usually will say I love to drop the doctor from it, but I will say this, and then I don't want to spend too much time on it because I want to come back to the racial trauma talk, but. Working in primarily white spaces, I get treated a different way. I literally work at a group practice where they will say, Dr. So-and-so, we're all doctors, we're all psychologists and psychiatrists. Like the whole practice is that except for interns. And so they will say Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so. And I hear them when their patients are checking in, they'll say, oh, you're here for Dr. So-and-so. Oh, you're here for Dr. And then when my patients check in, or if they refer to me, they say Catherine. And it's one of the reasons why I always say, when people say, what do you want to be called? I say Dr. J. And it's a silly reason too, but Dr. J. And it's not because I feel like I'm better than anybody else, but because I get highly disrespected and people will drop the doctor on me all the time, but say it for everybody else.
Wow. That blows. You're a little bit shorter than Dr. J, though.
Yeah, I am, but
Just,
that was why I went. That's why I say Dr. J because of him.
I love it. And some of my listeners will be like, "Who's Dr. J?" just Google it. Well, yeah,
the basketball guy,
yeah, that was really tall. Yeah, and we called him Dr. J. I played for the 76ers, I think. I don't even know much. I have no idea why I know that, Dr. Jackson. No clue. Well, listen, as somebody who has earned a master's degree and is pursuing a doctorate degree myself, I can promise you, when I get that doctorate degree, I'm getting it. So people say elementary, my dear Watson, or Dr. Watson, I presume. And so, but you said you wouldn't talk too much about that because you want to get back to racial trauma. That is racial trauma. It's yours, and that's why you're here today. And to that
You're
point,
right. I didn't. See, racial trauma happens so much. I'd never even put that together as a racial trauma.
1,000%.
Because of the difference of the way that I would be treated.
Right, 1,000%. And there will be a point where that we talk about trauma. I educate my listeners on what trauma is. And by definition, it is anything that moves us outside of that window of tolerance. And so if on any given day, you just made your massive payment on your student loan to earn that doctorate degree, and somebody calls you Catherine. Yeah, somebody calls you Catherine. Yeah, that is disrespectful, and that is traumatic because it is not identifying, it is not appreciating the hard work that you've done and had to work double because you are not white. And you are a woman on top of that. And so no, I'm glad you threw that in there because that is racial trauma. And you said something there that actually is a great segue into TJ Knight's episode. TJ was a black male and he came to the podcast, he is. He's still here, y'all. TJ came to the podcast. I love TJ so much. He loves Jesus, loves people, and wants people to love Jesus. And so, but grew up in he had an ACE score of like 7 or 8. And so this was not a dude that has not had trauma. But he chose to share a trauma with us that we all know, and so I'm not going to rehash that. He got pulled over, and he could tell probably 25 stories of being pulled over, and because he's a black male being disrespected. But he said something on that episode that I want to pick your brain a little bit as a psychologist. He said, because I said to him, I don't want to have to make you my professor. I realize that in some ways what you're doing here today, and I would say the same thing to you, Dr. Jackson, is the opposite of bleeding on the people that didn't cut you. Even though I didn't personally cut you or cut TJ, it was the opposite. And so I said, TJ, please help us know what can those of us that want to change, because that was one thing that Tiffany said on her episode, is she said, it's a complete sentence, change. I said, what is one thing we can do? And here's what he said, and I'm looking down again because I don't want to get it wrong. He said, we didn't want Aunt Jemima taken off of the pancake syrup bottle. We didn't have a problem with Uncle Ben's or any of the statues that were removed. All that happened with that was that white people felt better. We just want you to listen.
Yeah.
So my question to you, and this is a lot to unpack, but I say every time I exit a microphone the same 5 things to people, and one of them is that you are heard. Can you talk to us about psychologically what it does when somebody actually shuts their mouth and listens instead of trying to fix it? Because TJ said, we don't want you to fix it. We just want you to listen.
I feel like when we take the time to listen to somebody, we're able to, even without the words, to express a certain level of empathy for what they're going through, even if you've never been through it. But when we rush to talk, when we rush to fix, oftentimes that comes off more as like sympathy. So I still feel so bad for your situation. It's not that you can't feel bad for it, but when we listen, people feel heard, they feel seen. And so rushing, trying to fix it, oftentimes that will take up space. And sometimes, and this has happened to me in some meetings, especially after the George Floyd murder, the whole thing, when people were trying to talk about it, became more white tears and white fragility. And then it just shifted from the people who were impacted by it, or the most impacted by it, and afraid for family members. And even in my community, which is a mixed community, up at the gas station straight out from my house, like if I go a couple blocks, a nice amount of blocks, the first gas station near my home, somebody had put up a hate thing about like go back to Africa or something like that. I can't remember what the words were because I didn't want to internalize it, but it was something to that effect. And this is a multicultural community. They didn't want, I guess, the Black people who were starting to move over here, not even starting, we've been here, and on and on. So when you say listen, you just truly just listen and let the person express what is going on, express their pain without, like you said, bleeding on somebody, and turning it to be about your pain for their pain, so to speak. And we get it. We all go through it. Like you heard all of these guests that you shared today, your heart goes out to them and the experiences that they went through. But you don't switch it in like, I just feel so bad. And then the rest of the podcast becomes about how bad you feel about the racism that was done to them. So I hope that answered it. I feel
you more
like
than
answered several things in there.
No, you more than answered it, and you hit on something that I was going to ask you anyway, because this was difficult for me to absorb myself because I am an empath, and so I am likely to get teary when somebody tells me something sad. But you use some words there that were convicting to even me. And I was going to bring this up anyway. So when TJ said, we just want you to listen, because here's the thing. There is one commodity on this planet that we all have that once we spend it, we can't get it back. And that is time, right?
Yeah.
And so for him to come on and to say, we just want you to listen. And then when we take our time out of our busy schedule, like you've done for me here today, and you have no idea how much I appreciate this, because
I'm honored to
because
be
you
here.
are not being paid to do this. And so listeners out there, when we just listen to somebody, and when TJ said that just made white people feel better, it feeds into your point. And I love the vernacular you used there. The George Floyd thing turned into white tears and white fragility. Now listen, I absolutely sobbed over that, and I can't unsee that knee on his jugular vein. I can't unsee that as a human being. So I don't want my listeners to think that we can't be sad about it. But if you're going to hold space, if you're going to give the only commodity that you have to someone that is a Black or brown person or indigenous or anybody except for you, if you're going to sit down and give them your most precious commodity, then you're telling them, in a sense, without saying a word, like if you just sit and listen and absorb what they're hearing, as difficult as it is. My cousin called me out on this. She lives up in Canada, and she lived in Toronto for a good portion of her life, and that's like a huge global melting pot in Toronto. Nice. And so she and I FaceTimed after the George Floyd incident, and I was sobbing. She's like, you had to stop. And I said, huh? She said, that's the problem. This didn't happen to you. This didn't happen to our community. This didn't happen to you. It's okay to be sad. And it's okay to cry, but don't do it in the presence of the person that's trying to help you understand what it's like to live.
Cousin that I'm sending her a virtual hug, because and ask what is needed of the group that we are centering, the group that we are focusing on at the moment. Like we have the Asian hate attack, right? And so if we were having a meeting on that, then we would focus in on that group. Right. It's not, yes, I will cry. And I will cry before I get there. I will cry afterwards. But in this moment, I just want to hold the space and talk to the Asian community about what they need from me as a person who's not within the Asian community.
Right. And I think it's a little bit, it's a little bit like raising kids in some way too, right? Like you focus in on what they need and listen to them. It's not about you at that point. It is about the person sitting in front of you. And so if you are, and one of the things that I did on all of these podcasts is admitted my white privilege. Now, that was not hard for me to say because, again, as I've indicated to you and as my listeners know, I'm well educated. I have a master's degree in business administration. I was babysat by well-known serial killers. I survived a terrible childhood. I have an ACE score of 9. I am a domestic violence survivor, and I am still white privileged.
Mhm.
Still white privileged.
That's deep because you do have a lot that people could focus on, but you still, I think you operate in a way that's really different from a lot of people within your group.
Well, and that's why we're doing this, because I really have a heart to help people. That's why I do what I do. That's why I do this podcast. I am so grateful to the Lord for what he has done for me and my own trauma healing. And so it is all about my life versus Philippians 1:12, where the Bible says, I want you to understand that the things that have happened to me have really happened to further the gospel. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, and so maybe that's why I have a little bit of a different take on this. I don't know. But what I know is I want to be part of that complete sentence change. Period, paragraph. And we're going to talk about I want to ask you one more question about the last interview, who was with Jen Uren. And you and I are actually recording this episode on the day that Jen's episode dropped. So Jen is a podcasting friend of mine and my age too, right? And so, but she and her husband, through a series of events that only God could have orchestrated, at 43 or 44, adopted a brother and sister who were biracial. And so I wanted to talk to her because that is something really sexy in the white community, particularly in the church. And there's a lot of good to it. I have got really good friends that have adopted from other communities and other countries and all the things. And I know that the black community has an opinion about that, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But Jen and her husband, Jim, ended up with 2 biracial children. And she talked to me about she wanted to talk about the trauma that she's worried about for these 2 children. They're being raised in a white family, and I mean white Chicago suburb, what you're looking at right here, well educated. And so it's not even like these kids go to school with people that look like them, right? They're in white suburbs. And so I asked her a question. I said, what is your greatest fear for these children? And one of them is a little boy and a little girl. And she said, my greatest fear is that they will feel like they don't fit in anywhere. Are they white enough for the white community? Are they black enough for the black community? And to your point earlier, this should not even be a question. You shouldn't have to change your hair. You can't change your skin color. She shouldn't have to worry about this. We should accept them because they're precious children of the Most High God. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I do have quite a few of my listeners who have adopted outside of their culture and outside of their race. And there are some dynamics there that you probably can speak to, both as a black woman and as a professional. And I would love to hear your opinion on that.
And so these are my personal thoughts of this, definitely not more on a clinical basis, but from what I understand, and even within my family, there's interracial marriages. And so what I feel like, when we're talking about being able to be like effective parents with somebody who looks different from you, or even if they have part of your genes, but then they might look different and people are going to see them as that other thing. So like if you're married, a white and a black person are married, that child might identify as interracial and love both sides, but a lot of times, especially depending on the hue, they will be seen as black and treated as black. And so one of the big things from my own personal experience that comes from this, whether you adopt or it's an interracial relationship and you have interracial children or biracial children, is that love the whole culture and not just the one person that you're married to. Because I see that a lot, is that they love that Black person or they love that Latino person, but they don't love all of it. And so if you don't love all of what comes with the person, I just wonder if being in a interracial relationship
is
or
for you.
Adopting kids, who don't look like you, if that's a good thing, because you can unknowingly still pass down some racist ways, or trying to force the kids to be in spaces because you're coming from like your white perspective,
Right, right.
so to speak.
And
So
she did share with me, which I thought was really cool. So they're Caribbean, and to your point, not all Black people are from Africa. So they're of Caribbean, and so she talked a lot about the importance, because I had her on the podcast to talk to, because most of my listeners are Christians, and my church in particular, it has this amazing ministry that works with with the state, really, and that ministry has been licensed to train foster parents. And so because of the dynamics of the Black and brown community, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there, in the foster care system, at least in the state of Florida, it leans more heavily towards not white children being in the foster care system. So obviously these
I feel like that's everywhere. I don't know if it's just Florida. I
Yeah.
feel like that's a lot of different places where there are more children of color who are not being
Right.
adopted, because I don't know that in our communities of color that we adopt as much as like the white community.
Right. And why is that, you think? I'm just curious.
I don't know. So that one I can't, like,
Yeah.
I don't, like, I've never read anything. I've never researched it out, but I'm not sure.
One
why
of the
we
things I really love
don't.
about the Black community in particular, and having grown up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, is just the tight knitness. We talk a lot about community on my podcast. We have 3 C's: we have church, counseling, and community, and just the tight knitness of that community. And so I can kind of see, and by the way, you mentioned that about interracial marriage, and so we are recording this on June the 15th, and yesterday, it was either yesterday or the day
Yes.
before,
Yeah,
was
I think
was
was
the
it Sunday or Monday?
yeah,
It was
they all
yeah.
run together at this point, Dr. Jackson. But after COVID, I don't even know what day it is half the time. But it was a landmark anniversary of when interracial marriages became
Okay, yeah.
legal, and
Yeah.
that so was impressed on me as a child. My mom loved this movie, and I still can't to this day think of it. But it was an old movie about a interracial couple, except for she was incredibly light skinned, and so no one knew that she was Black. But I remember saying to my mom as a child, "Well, why can't they be married? That doesn't make any sense to me." And so when you mentioned that, immediately it popped up. But that's good. That's a good word for those of you out there who are adopting from other cultures than yours, because Jen talked about on that interview, she's like, we celebrate their Caribbean culture, and in this particular case, it was a bit of an open adoption too, even though there is no communication with the birth parents at this point. Jen knew that at some point when these kids get to be older, and this is true about any adopted kid, and it's true about me, because my mom took all of my childhood secrets with her when she left this planet, and that's hard, in not knowing where do I get this mannerism from? Like, I talk with my hands, or I talk fast, or where did I get this bent from, and where do I get that bent from? And so I can Jen just talked about the importance of immersing them in that Caribbean community, and that Caribbean culture, I guess is what I should say.
And that's what I meant by love. Like, you want to accept, you don't have to accept everything. I don't like everything about my own
Right.
culture.
Right.
I wish some things we would get rid of, but
Right.
it's a part of it, and I embrace it. So accepting it and celebrating. You can't just love just these, in her case, Caribbean kids. You gotta have some kind of appreciation for all of it. And This Is Us, the show, it ended completely this year. The whole, like the whole.
I cried
finale.
at every episode.
But they did a great job of that, because they had a Black child, and so they did that, modeled a really good way of how I feel like people who adopt out of the race, out of whatever their race is. Because, like, if I adopted a Latino child, I would need to know about that culture. If I adopted somebody from overseas, even if their skin looks like mine, I still need to have an understanding of what their, the differences in their culture.
Because we both know that their culture is embedded in their DNA, right?
Yes.
And so it is so important to do that. And so Jen mentioned, she gave some examples of how they do that. And so I just think that that circles back to identity, which you've been so great to talk to us about today. Well, now is the fun part of the whole interview has been fun, but I love it when when the guest gets to talk about your passion and how my listeners can go to your resources and get help. Now, again, I know because of state lines and those things, but you've got this passion for the holistic portion of healing that is so, so impressive and fascinating to me. And you had sent me an email after I sent you questions. You said, hey, can we do this little exercise? But before we do that, because we're literally going to close out on the exercise, I'm not even going to do my outro. And so listeners, you know that you're listening to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. But we're going to end this episode a little bit differently today after Dr. Jackson tells us a little bit about why she already told us why this is so important to her. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a medicine or a holistic approach. It can be a both. That's what I do. A lot of people call EMDR a holistic approach. That is absolutely what has absolutely saved my brain so many times. And so the mic is yours, my friend. Tell my people about it, about you, where they can find information on you, and then I'd love for you to exit us out of the interview with that exercise that you asked me if we could do.
So I'm not good at selling myself. I'm working on it. But you can find me on my website, which is just my name, Dr. Catherine Jackson, and Catherine spelled the traditional way. My name is pretty much like Michael Jackson's mom's name, but with a C.
Oh, there you
and
go.
So it's drcatherinejackson.com.
Where can they find you on Instagram? A lot of my listeners, are you on Instagram?
So yeah, so I'm all over the web. I have, if you go to my website,
you have a link tree
to all of my, most of my social media, but on Instagram, it's my name is at Dr. Catherine Jackson, and you can find me at the same handle on Clubhouse and on TikTok. I like TikTok. It's a fun way to share.
I have drunk the TikTok Kool-Aid. I can't tell you how many nights I've fallen asleep just doing this, scrolling
yes,
up.
I love to see people's stuff more than I actually post.
Same. And the algorithm that it's given me is so interesting. It's mental health and chronically ill people, but I watch it. And so, okay, so guys, so you find her. It's Catherine with a C. Doctor. Don't forget to put the doctor in front of it, or you will not find her. All right. So I've been so excited about this since you asked me the question. So talk to us about what you want to do next.
I am going to dim my lights because I don't like bright lights, period. And it's better to me when we're doing a meditation. So we talked today a lot about racial trauma. And so we don't want to end with that, right? We don't want to leave with that feeling within our bodies. And so we're going to do a nice quick meditation together and just release some of that. Whether you're on the side of experiencing trauma or whether you're on the other side where you're trying to understand the racial trauma and you're trying to get through this thing and be an ally in this process. We're all going to take some collective breaths together, meditate, and we're going to release some of this out into the world. And so for everybody who is listening, I want you to take a moment and get really comfortable wherever you are. If you're listening on your couch, get nice and comfy. If you are listening and you're sitting in your work chair, just get as comfortable as you can. And if at any time during this meditation, you find that your mind is starting to get distracted, no worries. Just gently bring your mind back to this meditation and back to the breath. And so I want you to just take a deep breath in. As you slowly breathe out, just begin to truly settle your body and get grounded. And then take another deep breath in. This time, as you breathe out, begin to truly and fully relax your body, slowing down your thoughts. We're going to take one more nice deep breath in. I just want you to become aware of how you're feeling on the inside. Now let's gently scan our bodies and notice any places of peace or any places of comfort. Notice where that shows up in your body. And allow yourself to feel more and more of that comfort as you continue to breathe in and out, nice and slow, but with no specific focus on your breathing. And so we want to just go a little bit deeper into the meditation. So take another deep breath in. And as you slowly begin to breathe out, let's focus on these affirmations. You can say them aloud or you can say them in your head. I am at peace. I feel safe and secure in my body. I am enough. And I am a part of the change I wish to see. And just let those affirmations sit for a moment as you continue to breathe in and out naturally. And we're going to say these 2 more times. I am at peace. I feel safe and secure in my body. I am enough. I am a part of the change I wish to see. One more time. This time I want you to take it nice and slow and fully embody and let yourself truly feel each of the affirmations. I am at peace. I feel safe and secure in my body. I am enough. I am a part of the change I wish to see. And just let that sit there for a moment. As you breathe in and out slowly but naturally. And if you close your eyes, just slowly begin to open them and reacclimate yourself to the room. You can wiggle your fingers and your toes softly. You place some places and other spots in the room. And whenever you're ready, just go back into your day as you would.
Okay, guys, I don't know about you, but I am at peace. And so as we close this episode and as we close this series, I hope that you will always remember what I never leave a microphone without saying. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you are so, so valued. Thank you, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you.
Let my life glorify you and teach me to walk beside you.